So, this is Faith Over Breakfast, Season 2, Episode 34. Welcome to Faith Over Breakfast. I'm Eric, and Andy's sitting across from me, and
we're talking power as the jets of the U.S. military fly low.
So if you want a podcast for a discounted rate during flight patterns is when you should sign up.
That's right.
Anyway.
That's what we do.
Yeah, that's what we do. Well, yeah, we talked about the gospel. It was an interesting conversation. Enjoy.
The gospel as it applies to some of the discussions going on in politics.
Yeah. And then we can just talk. We're live now?
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's cool.
Hey, Eric. How's it going? Good morning.
I'm doing okay.
How's your Bruegger's bagel sandwich? What'd you get there? Is that a pumpernickel?
Yeah. They were almost out of everything, but I like pumpernickel bagels.
Yeah. Yeah, I haven't had one in a long time. So I see you went to Starbucks and Bruegger's, even though Bruegger's sells coffee.
Well, you never know if I have a Starbucks cup if I actually went to Starbucks.
Why? Do you just steal their cups?
Well, I go to Starbucks, and then I save their cups, and I rinse them out, and then I make my own drinks and just carry them around.
Old school.
Yeah, so I try to keep them as long as I can.
Okay, so what's in there?
Chai latte.
You did go to Starbucks.
This one today, I went to Starbucks.
Yeah, okay.
But all week now, if I'll be carrying this around, I will not have gone to Starbucks.
Dang, man. That's pretty pastoral right there.
Well, my wife...
That's when you know you've gone big.
The Tucson... Is it the Tucson Roasters?
There's a Tucson Roasters.
Yeah, so my
Tucson
wife...
Coffee Roasters.
Yeah, Coffee Roasters. She loves their chai lattes. She loves them. So she went and found the chai stuff that they use, and she
Over at Walmart?
Over at Walmart. Now, you have to special order it, and it's expensive, $60 a bottle.
Oh, you guys are doing well.
But it lasts forever.
Okay.
So, because it's only one pump, and it's like this huge thing.
Whoa.
I know everybody can see my hands on.
Yeah, I know. Everybody
awesome.
just realized you're talking about a 2-foot tall.
Yeah.
Thing
Anyway,
of chai.
so you just put one squirt in there and steam up some almond milk or whatever, and you're good to go. It's really good.
Wow.
So.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm amazing. I'm ridiculously amazing. Just like how.
And you have a list of things you want to apply the gospel to on a Tuesday morning. It's Tuesday morning here in Tucson. We had a unbelievable 60-some degree May day yesterday, which was
ridiculous.
What in the world was that? I loved it, just because I know, we're going to forget those existed pretty soon. But yeah, anyway, here we are. Sun's back out. Tucson on a Tuesday. Pumpernickel bagel, chai, and Eric has a list. What is it? Mm-hmm. You want to apply the gospel. You're going to chew up in that mic. Yeah, that's what a pumpernickel bagel sounds like.
Yummy,
Thank
guys.
you, Eric.
So here's the thing. I bought a car. Remember, we talked about it on air. I think that.
Does it still run?
I don't know.
Oh.
It ran all the way to Jeff's on Monday because he bought all the parts. And his son had got married, so I was delayed on the fixing things because he closed the shop.
Oh, yeah. We've been getting his priorities all mixed up. Can I just say, I think I'm opening a car dealership. I helped you buy a car. I've got a car sitting out front of here that's for sale. I just helped somebody else buy a car from a neighbor here, last weekend. And Craigslist just started charging me to post ads.
Oh, really?
Which means, you know what that means? It means I've posted too much. So they're charging me. So I guess that means I'm like a dealer.
How much do they charge you?
$5. I didn't do it. I just moved over to OfferUp. Anyway.
Well, so here's the thing. I have my dad's car for a while.
Okay.
And the radio works in my dad's car.
Oh, that's surprising.
So I was listening to NPR, which I don't listen to the news or really read the news very often.
Yeah, that
because
explains
it's just depressing and it's hard for me to handle. But, we have these issues that are going on in our world. In particular, things like Iran. And
where'd you run?
I ran to abortion law.
Oh, that's the other issue.
Then I ran from abortion law to immigration and poverty. And we're talking about, marriage rights and all these kinds of things. And I'm thinking maybe we need to start talking about how we think about these things from a gospel perspective.
Yeah.
in particular, as the election process is just about to really
it's going to happen.
get started.
Yep.
And
we got 97 Democratic candidates to choose from. Yeah.
And I think we have talked about this on the podcast before, but once the election happened, it was really hard for both of our churches.
Yeah.
And to understand where they fit and how they're in community together. And so maybe, I mean, I liked our last week's talk about the gospel, so it's a good theme that we could begin to talk about how we might approach these things from a gospel perspective and not necessarily, I don't know, a partisan American.
Oh, so you're going politics on it.
I'd like to go politics.
You didn't specify that. You just said, applying the gospel to,
Well, to anything. I think there's some principles, and we can use them, but I think there are some things like war.
Iran.
Yes, things like abortion law that just happened.
Yeah.
Things like, personally, how we deal with our marriages.
Yeah.
And I think immigration, poverty are big things that are being talked about right now, and we're all experiencing. So those things to talk about.
Which is why you're rewashing your Starbucks cups. You're experiencing poverty.
Yes. No, I rewash them because I'm trying to help the environment in one tiny little way. It is? Yeah, I think,
Hey, good job, man.
I'm trying.
That's good. That's encouraging.
So.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you could be in poverty if you bought one of these every day.
And a lot of people are.
Yes.
Yeah.
because of
this discussion just happened here in our wood shop where one of the guys used to work at the Starbucks in South Tucson and was just discussing how the same, people clearly struggling in life are throwing down $5-6
for Starbucks
every single day. Yeah.
Yeah.
And hey, I could be guilty of that. There's that pumpernickel again. Listen to that crunch. And here's the thing about a Bruegger's bagel. It's got that soft inner core, but that little bit of crunch on the outside. And Eric is exhibiting that for us. Oh, man. Wow, delicious. When we used to record live over breakfast, our mic wasn't quite as precise.
And you were eating the sandwiches, and I usually got there early and had already eaten.
Yeah, that's true.
So a lot of times it was you.
It was me.
And not me, so this is a switch.
Eric, we're 6 minutes deep. Let's jump in.
Well, yeah, let's talk about, maybe we could discuss what we think the gospel is. What are some of the gospel principles that when we think about applying them to things, and then we could kind of talk about how that works with different.
Okay, so let me throw this out there. I just started with, this was discussed last night at our groundwork session on evangelism. It was discussed I brought it up in a sermon Sunday. So we were talking about, and Sunday we're in the portion of 1 John where it talks about the last hour. So it's like, what does this mean? The last day is the last hour. But one of the portions we discussed was kind of what should you be doing during this last hour,
right?
And John in 1 John tells you to kind of be on alert of being deceived, and tells you to abide in the teaching that had been entrusted to you. So we talked about just the gospel and some of the clear portions of it. So one of the things I tried to draw out was that in order to understand grace, you need two things. And I'm now holding up my hands in a very dramatic way that
you're acting like a preacher. That's fine. I'll narrate as you go.
I'm just going to keep doing it because that's the only way I can think.
I understand. Your brain as a pastor, it's also in your hands. I've learned this.
Yeah.
There's some brain in your hands.
Brain hands.
Brain hands.
So you need to understand what righteousness looks like. So you need law. And then you need to understand that God's giving you a gift outside of your own righteousness, which is grace. So the good news of the gospel is incomprehensible unless you understand what is right and wrong. But following, getting everything right is not how you get the gift that God is giving. So, kind of understanding that and operating that way. So you can't, if we were to jump off of that little definition, you can't represent grace to anybody if there's no understanding of what is right, wrong, true. But you also cannot reconcile anybody to God by the pathway of getting things right. So what do you do with that when it comes to public policy?
So we got rules. Public policy is all about rules.
It has to be.
Right.
Well, what else would it be?
Right.
I mean, even when people say, let's be kind to each other, well, it's just kind of a rule.
Right.
Yeah, what else would it be?
Right. So maybe so what you're saying is the gospel has an element in it of us knowing what right and wrong is. In a sense,
I think it's incomprehensible without that backdrop.
Right. You gotta have some sense of what is good and what is evil.
Well, to see grace and mercy, you have to know what you deserve.
Right.
Would be or what the grace is assuaging.
Right.
Right.
So let's build out 1 Corinthians chapter 15, right? Where Paul says, first thing he says is, this is what I was told, I'm going to tell you. Mm-hmm. And he says, according to the scriptures.
Yeah.
And then he doesn't say anything about sin,
mm-hmm.
doesn't say anything about repenting. He just talks about believing, and then he declares what happened.
Okay.
So there's an element of the gospel that has nothing to even do with that. I'd say there's an element, at least the first element of the gospel is a declaration of rule. Whose rule?
Okay,
right.
Like kingdom rule.
Kingdom rule, yes.
Okay.
I think Paul thinks that.
Mm-hmm.
And he thinks that declaration has a power.
Do you think he takes the same approach? I mean, that in that scripture perhaps, but I've always wondered with Paul if he didn't kind of read who he was talking to, like in where where he jumped in or how it seems like he took a lot of different approaches.
Well, there's I think 7 to 9, I can't remember, between 7 and 9 proclamations of the gospel in Acts.
Uh-huh.
And all of them in some way, even the Acts 17 has a sense of according to the scriptures, according to the beginning, according to it's always a declaration first of who's ruler, because Paul sees himself as a herald. Then he sees himself as a person to point out and explain right and wrong. I mean, even Peter in his evangelistic thing, he stands up and he says, this Jesus with whom you crucified,
yeah, right,
God raised to be Lord and Christ. Like there's this element of establishing Christ's rule through his death and resurrection for our sin. So I think the thing that. So the question I would have in what you're talking about, and I would love to see you kind of mess with this a little bit, talk about it, is the gospel is certainly a personal thing, a relationship between you and God.
Right.
But it's built up of a kingdom called the church, right? A people, and so people who are ruled by Jesus. And so in some ways, like how do I take this idea that, okay, let's just start with the first one I put there. We have America, the U.S., with which we are citizens of, and we have Iran, and there's a conflict happening. Mm-hmm. These people are what I would call demigods. They're people who are raised up to rule. They're the emperors of our time. We're to honor and respect them. But they're going to war with each other or threatening war or whatever you want.
Right.
So we know who's king. We know that all those people are broken in their own sin and in darkness. So how do we sit in the U.S. and our brothers and sisters who are in Iran? Mm-hmm. How do we begin to think about this in a way that unites us and in a way that can communicate really what the gospel is to our neighbors in the context of that? Like, how do we?
Well, there's.
I mean, how do you
not to diverge from what
you can diverge? That's fine.
Can I? Oh, yes. May I?
I am the emperor of this podcast today.
Yeah. It's obviously. No. So there's how can we think about it? I tend to think it has to do with what your role in it as well. So, okay. I mean, let's say that we are. What is that?
We got podcast intruders.
Yeah, here, go kick him out real quick. No, what the okay? Where was I? So
your role,
the role. Yeah. So if you are, say, in your church and you have a friend in Iran that you instant message who is also a believer, and you're chatting about things and how could you think about it. But then another question would be if you're actually on the surveillance team that saw the nuclear weapon,
right.
Or if you are someone who is shaping policy, who has to make a decision. I think there are different.
Okay, those are good. And then let's throw one in there.
Right.
You are sitting at coffee.
Yep.
And your buddy says, "Hey, man, what do you think about this whole Iran thing?"
Sure. Yeah.
So let's all those. I think those are all good. Like, how do we?
Yeah.
And we can then try to apply these principles to immigration, to marriage, to let's think those things through.
Okay, so if somebody said to me, "What do you think of this whole Iran thing?"
Yeah.
I mean, I guess I would say I think I would assume that they indeed loaded some weapons on a ship. I don't know much about that. I hope we can trust the people in their positions. I'm not always sure about that sort of thing, but I hope so. And I would say their job is to, sort of a la Paul and Romans, to protect and execute justice. And so I hope that they are carefully parsing that out. I hope that we have thought well about who we put there and who we put in position to appoint people there, because now this is really important. I suppose that's what I would say.
You would say
what would you would say something far more deep and spiritual.
Well, no, maybe this thing, and partly I don't have it all down. I'm like, hey, so
right.
Andy and Eric are going to talk about how you apply the gospel to Iran. In fact, that's my thesis, my master's thesis, and you've worked hard and long on this and do lectures, and so we kind of, I think it's something I want to work out on the air or on the podcast together, and think it through, because I think, okay, so I think the gospel itself has a declaring thing. I was listening to our last podcast,
we talked about last time,
which is really good. Like it's not always purely an invitation to repent from your sins. As first, it's a declaration of the kingdom of God, and the kingdom of God doesn't want there to be violence and war. It may be inevitable, but it's not what God had designed. That's not what He wants. Peace. He's blessed is the peacemaker. Blessed,
sure.
So an element of the gospel is to say, this is not the way it's supposed to be. I think sometimes we tend to say, like what you were saying, which is the next level down, which is, I hope everybody's doing what they're supposed to do and that they're honoring principles of justice and goodness. Right. But we forget, I think, in some sense, applying the gospel is just saying, this is not the way it's supposed to be. There shouldn't be this conflict. There shouldn't be this violence.
Sure.
It's going to create sadness and mourning and death, and that's not good.
It's always terrible.
Right? And I think we forget to say that. So I think applying the gospel is really being willing to continually say, this is not the way it's supposed to be. Jesus died for this. This is why He died. We're so broken that we're talking about trying to avoid and deal with mass destruction of humanity.
Yeah, and I'm for that. I guess I'm imagining somebody who's in the decision-making room, right?
Sure.
And they are a Christian.
Yeah. So
I know, and you might say, I don't think that's possible. But
I think it's possible to be a Christian and be there. I don't know if, I'd have to wrestle morally with should you be there.
Well, yeah, but then, I think there's also a moral wrestling, if we're going to talk about how it shouldn't be this way, of Christians not being in any place like that. Because there's levels of conflict. We're talking about a drastic one like nuclear war, but, I'm on a local business board, and there's been conflict there and
Sure.
and there have been conflicts. Like, I mean, they seem very minor, but just differences and
Sure.
where people can't work together between different associations, and I'm just saying,
Association War.
no, for real though. Like, and that's, I mean, aren't these like the micro versions of the big thing that we're talking? I mean, it's
Right, and I agree with you. I think we should be part of those. I just, when it comes to taking people's life, I'm still a little...
Yeah, no, for sure.
When I have the power to take mass amounts of people's lives by pushing buttons and making orders, that's different.
Well, yeah, it is. But I also would say, like, if we're for shalom, or, you know, that things ought to be peaceful, if we just go, well, I can't be a part of any group that could make a decision like that, then we're vacating all the areas in which, you know, actual experiential shalom could be accomplished.
Right. You're making my argument that I used to make against homeschooling.
Oh, yeah, perfect.
No.
So, yes.
Not that, I mean,
Yeah.
I've learned that position is both painful for people to have to deal with hearing from me, and also probably not fully an honest way of dealing with things. But yeah.
Well, yeah. So at least I'm being dishonest with you, right?
Yeah.
No, but I
didn't
guess
mean that, but yeah.
I guess, like, I'm just saying that I don't know. To me, it's very complicated. I feel the same tension.
But either way, you can still say this is, even if you're in there and you're on you've seen the bombs, you're the man, you're up there. You still could say, hey, no matter how and what decisions I have to make, this is not the way it's supposed to be.
Right. Well, that's kind of where I was headed. I would hope, because I know the type of person. I've met people who want power, and the idea that I could push that button is kind of really interesting to them.
Mm-hmm.
And that worries me, that you know, and that's a way that people feel, and I think there's a spiritual layer to all of that. So I would rather, if there was somebody that had the power to push that button, I would rather it be the kind of person who would weep pushing the button, or who would just lament that it is this way, and that would ever have to be this way, and would only do it if utterly convinced that there are more lives to be saved here by doing that, and we must bear this sword right now.
Right.
And I'm not saying that solves it or fixes it, but I would much rather have somebody who wept as they did it than somebody who went, let's kill them. You know, like, let's get these terrible people out. Like that, you know. Right.
Well, and that may be that. So part of the gospel is encouraging people not to demonize the enemy.
Yeah. To go, these are people like me.
They're image bearers.
They're image bearers. And I always think if I'd grown up under this type of radicalization, I'd be doing the same thing.
Sure.
Like these are not people who are crazy different than me. They're people just like me. And I very well could be one of them, and I could have been, and I could become one of them if we go that direction.
Right. And to go to the the philosopher's Sting, in his song where he says, "I hope the Russians love their children too." That's one of his.
Sure.
That is a.
And I'm sure they do.
He's appealing to the humanity of us all. Right. Like there's this image-bearing humanity that we all hold on to, or we hope to, and I think so. Part of the gospel and part of maybe declaring God's rule is fighting for the humanity of our enemy.
Yeah.
I think that is probably the beginning, would be my thing.
Yeah.
So then what do you do? Like, okay, so I mean, Iran has some interesting things in it. I mean, because, there's certainly a threat there. But there are plenty of different wars that our country has gotten itself into that aren't necessarily clear and present dangers.
No, right. I mean, this is just my sense, is that we look for conflicts to enter into more than most nations. And I think there's a dark side to that. And I also, then on the flip side, I think some would say with much power comes much responsibility. So because we have the tools and the wherewithal to do it.
Right.
So I could see both sides of that.
But then you end up with Machiavellian statements of the ends justify the means and things
Sure.
like that, and you're just like, I don't know if that's
Well, but I mean, somebody could say, the police officers ought to be looking for criminals because they have the resources.
right.
Just because they're police officers doesn't mean they should sit in quiet rooms and go, well, I don't hear anything, so nothing's going on out there.
Sure.
So the question is, has the world dubbed us their police officers, or have we declared that upon them?
Right.
And
Yeah.
what does it mean to live in such a connected world where I can listen to conversations across the globe and
Right.
and with a satellite peer into people's windows?
Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I'm really when I think about the gospel. So I mean, at the Village we talk about the gospel a lot in this declaration form, but we also talk a lot about it being what the word you'd use it, and immersing yourself in the story of Jesus. So what we would call being gospel fluent or story fluent in the sense that you have a familiarity with Jesus' stories to the point where you can find yourself in them. You can tell them in your own words. You can begin to really make them real to you, like really hit his story that you're part of.
Right.
And then letting that death and resurrection have a bigger weight because of how much you're in that story. And then the interesting part to me is in you talking about the person who pushes the button or makes powerful declarations.
I think it feels like I'm talking about people who are in the middle. Like, say, if we were talking about the election, I would be talking about the candidates.
Right.
You're talking about the people back home watching it on television.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And those both are important, right?
Right.
But it's the person at home watching the television needs to have a certain view through which they process it all to know how to participate.
Sure.
And then you've got the people who they're debating,
right,
and they are actually going to get into office
and have power.
And
so
both exist, and yeah.
I mean, yeah. So I guess like the second part though, and talking about what you're saying is that there is this identity that's very clear within 1 Peter 2 of being a royal priesthood and our role in that, of declaring our journey at how Christ brought us out of the darkness and into the light, and understanding the healing that comes from the scars of Christ and all, the wounds of Christ and all of that. Like, we are priests, and I think so. What does it mean when I look at the election? When I look at immigration? When I look at my own wife? What does it mean to be a priest? How do I apply that to all of these different places in a consistent way? Because priests operate much differently, I think, than the average guy. Like, they have a mission, and when you're a royal priesthood, there's a kingly mission, like priests get messy.
Yeah.
But people, they're in it.
They're in it.
They get dirty, and then they also, Old Testament priests bring a sacrifice to atone for people, but now we're reconciling priests. We offer Christ's sacrifice.
So let's apply that to immigration. How?
It's a big issue in our part of the world.
In our part of the world, country. So we got to get messy and bring the God. I mean, I hear a lot of talking,
right,
by Christians on both sides. And there are people who are actually doing
stuff.
A thing.
Oh yeah, a lot of churches are.
Right.
In fact, who is the point for all of the not immigrants but people looking for asylum is the churches. The churches are opening up their spaces, giving people showers, getting them clothes, getting them connected to their relatives.
And unfortunately, mostly not the conservative. Very few. I really wish we didn't have these labels, conservative and liberal churches. Because people think of that along political lines, but originally those terms were theological.
Right.
But the more theologically liberal churches, unfortunately, are doing that more.
Yeah, and I don't know that. I know, like, for instance,
from what I've noticed, that's been except the Catholics break that.
Yeah, and I think I know that in the RCA, they're doing a ton.
Good.
So, I think there are. Yeah, more moderate and conservative churches who are
good.
I think what I've noticed is that usually in the immigration world, you're right, the more mainline churches open up their doors and are engaged politically that way. And
what do you
with
mean
immigrants,
by mainline?
So I'm talking about Lutherans, Presbyterians.
But how does one get the term mainline apply? I mean, I know how to categorize. I'm just trying to work that out for our folks.
They're connected to denominations that have some legacy. They have some length of time. They're connected more to Europe in there. So you have a Lutheran started, in Germany. You have the Anglicans.
But you have conservative and liberal Lutherans.
Yes.
Yeah.
But they're all still, these are major denominations over the last 100 years that kind of, that's how I understand them anyway. Whereas we have people like you and I who are more independent, not connected, loosely connected.
Trying to figure that out.
Getting grants from denominations, those kinds of things,
Right. Why aren't you doing that?
We are.
Good. Anyway. But yes, so churches are engaging with that. But let's say in your church, you're teaching your people, we are priests, and it needs to get messy, and we need to actually bring this reconciliation. So how does that, if you could, imagine how that could work out in the next 6 months, what might people practically do?
Well, I think
because there's, we can ethereally.
I actually think that, and here's maybe where you and I will diverge. I don't know. I don't think that. I do think that there are people who should have a role in government who are followers of Jesus, but I think predominantly as priests, our job is to make the declaration of man's humanity. That every time that we come to an issue, from Iran to immigration to poverty, the church's job is to say these are image bearers. We don't always
who and who are we saying that to, and how are we saying
we
that?
We actually
to them?
say that to power. I think we're asking power, whatever power is, to understand and recognize the humanity of people.
Great.
We aren't necessarily giving them the solution.
Okay.
I think the solution is to remember that there is ways that to remind people of what Jesus invites us to do with those people who are human.
So in the next 6 months, at the village or through the village, if you could imagine how you would say that to power practically,
sure.
What would that look like?
Well, that was weird. I think there's a buzz coming off of my mic.
Might be.
Did you hear? We just went
changed.
Dead silent.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there must be a short in my wire. We'll need to fix that.
Yeah. Shucks.
Oh, hey, we learned something live on the air. Well, I think there's a couple things. One, the thing that I struggle with so much is we live in, like you said earlier, an interconnected world where I could actually probably tell you what somebody ate if I worked a little hard on Google in Iran right now. Like I could say Joe Schmo had this, shawarma, because we're that interconnected because he took a picture of himself and put it on Instagram. Where, we talk about the first century, you barely know you know what your neighbor's doing. And you're afraid of the Roman soldier who's marching by. Like you're in Paul saying, live a quiet life. Don't call attention to yourself. Like, don't make a mess for this little church that's starting out.
So how does that all, I get that, but I'm trying to boots to the ground here. Like what would it look like to declare the humanity of people in Iran to power?
So I think in a congregation, you remind the people over and over, and you ask them to remind each other that Iran and the people of Iran bear the image of God.
Okay.
And that we should pray for them. And that we should, when we encounter others speaking poorly of them, we should stand up for them.
Okay.
Not necessarily to justify their actions, simply to remind people that they're human. Mm. I think we have to ask ourselves, okay, when it comes to the immigration thing, who's really our neighbor right now? Maybe we're at a point where we know brothers and sisters who are working with immigration, that if we feel called, we can support them some way, unless that's something that's connected to us. But we need to all be praying for them and for that work. And anytime there's an opportunity to speak in a public square, anytime to speak for the humanity. But I got to ask, who's my neighbor at this point? Right now, maybe my neighbor isn't an immigrant. Maybe my neighbor is the homeless, because the homeless are a big part now of our neighborhood. And I've noticed that the homeless. I mean, we are starting to have homeless people come to our church.
Seems like Jesus's thing on neighbor is, don't reduce it. like be willing for it to be, I don't know, Good Samaritan stuff. Like the neighbor and the Good Samaritan is, quite distant.
He is,
yeah.
but it's also who he walks
Yes,
by.
right.
He's right there.
Yeah. I would.
The guy in the ditch is the guy who's your neighbor.
But I bet you're bumping into a lot of people with, potentially, coming and working on your plumbing or whatever, who are not legal immigrants here. And so, are you asking that question? You think, it's.
Well, I think again, so that becomes your neighbor, and I think the invitation when you say somebody is human and they bear the image of God, that means you have to get into their story,
sure,
and to their angst and their anxiety, and it goes back to like what the social work told me when we started our church, and I was asking her, well, how does the church get involved? She said, please don't volunteer for anything. She said, adopt a single mom, make her your life, her problems your problems. Her anxieties, your anxieties. When she needs a babysitter, that's you.
Yeah.
That like make her story your story, and then she will become part of you, and then she will be doing what you're doing. And instead of trying to volunteer at a food thing. And
so I see your vision of at the Village of healing the city one person at a time in that. But I'm still trying to figure out how to declare
the immigrant
to power. Like what?
How do you declare to power that people are human,
right,
and bear the image of God?
Yeah.
Well, where do you find power in your life? Where does power exhibit itself? In a loud voice, somebody angrily talking about immigrants, that's power.
Sure.
If you feel so burdened by the issue and a call on God on your heart, then you go to the meetings and you speak differently. Instead of speaking and advocating for immigrants' rights, you advocate for their humanity.
Okay.
Which is, I don't think something Christians have done a lot of work on. So we have a lot to say, because what we say is, politically, like we need, people need to come in legally. This is the rules. People need to obey the rules. Or we say, hey, these are all humans. We have a whole bunch. They're our neighbors. We need to give them. We need to provide whatever we can provide. We have plenty. And so we have these two sides. Instead of saying, well, maybe neither one of these is right, or they could be, but what does it mean to just think about people as being they're human beings in a moment?
So you go to a public forum, and they're talking about immigration, and you've got two sides, and one is standing up going, these are basic human rights, people. Come on. We've got to extend people basic human rights. This is the next Holocaust, or they say things like that.
Yeah, real drastic things.
And then the other side goes, we need the rule of law, for goodness sakes. This is anarchy. What in the world? And then and you've got Disciple of the Village stands up and says, these people are human.
Mm-hmm.
And okay, and so say you do that.
Yeah.
And everybody goes, thanks, Eric, thank you. Okay, but back to we got to have the rule of law, or we've got to have
And then one side would be like, these people are human.
And I think both, the conservatives might go, yeah, we know, but humans need laws. And the liberals might go, right, that's why we're saying human rights.
So the question becomes, how is both of these things diminishing the image bearing of the individual?
And there's that, but I'm just getting at, so you say it, you get up and say it, and then what? And people go, thank you for your input, sir.
Yeah,
appreciate it. Does it go any further than that? Does it need to actually become influential as the U.S. power flies overhead?
Yes.
Does it need to move forward? Do you need to continue to engage? Do you need to be committed to engage? Do you need to work toward policies that determine what humanity is specifically? Or is it just you just say it?
Well, I think you start outside of the public square. I don't care about the public square. What I do care is about my neighbor.
Yeah.
And how he speaks about it. So I think that's the place that you speak to, because words are ways of not caring for people or caring for people. So that's one way. You start changing thinking by talking. I think the other thing is, again, it's an individual and communal thing where you're saying, who is the neighbor and how do I meet the neighbor? Like, I think there's an expectation that we meet everything. I guess there is the action. I know what you're saying, but you have to first establish how you think of it in the context of the gospel, I think is.
I mean, yeah, I'm with you. I agree with that. I just think there's like, I read a book, by the folks from the International Justice Mission at
Yes.
one point. And, at some point they went, for goodness sakes, the little girls are being raped over and over by the Westerners with money.
Yes.
And so we could talk forever.
Yes.
And we need to go get them out.
And that is,
right.
But who needs to go get them out?
Well, and they
need to go get them out. We need to get them out.
But interestingly, they had to work with the law. So they had lawyers on set. They worked with the legal structures within each country. They worked behind the scenes to create laws where they could actually prosecute. Because what they learned is if they just went in and took the one little girl out, usually that little girl ended up right back in, and if not, she was replaced in 2 hours. And so they were like, we need to rescue children out of these people's hands, and then we need to build just laws into the society, and we need to work toward holding people accountable to those laws. And that's, made a huge impact, but it's very multifaceted and has a lot of, there is the speaking, but then there's the acting, and then there's like policy that I would suggest reflects a kingdom not of this world here on this world. Like every time a policy is just and good, it's like a little ray of light.
I agree. And so I'm totally for all those things. I guess you're right. I think each person has a certain calling. And when you look at, I just go back to the first century and you're right. Paul used every little bit he could to get to the emperor to speak the gospel, because if the emperor changes, the world changes. And I think that's part of the Pauline thinking as he operates. So there is that mode.
And he interestingly had a background that lent him to being able to do that. And and was that going to be everybody? No. And some people prayed for him, and some people supported him monetarily, and so on and so forth. Right.
But the reality is, for the first 200 years of Christianity, it was a poor person's religion. In fact, the majority of the people who found Jesus were those who were poor.
Right.
And so they weren't people of power. They weren't people with influence.
And it was surprising what they accomplished.
Right.
Men like Cornelius listened to them.
Yes. So it's a very powerful thing. So I think there's a route but what the Roman government started saying was, well, these people bury our dead. They're not theirs. They go out into the forests and take our children who've been abandoned. And so I think there is an action. Yes, the gospel's action-oriented. We go down, we rescue, we do stuff. But now we also live in a world 2,000 years later where it's completely like all the underpinnings of the U.S., of England, of any progressive country, is Christianity. Right. The rule of law is Christian. It's nothing else. There's no other.
James K. Smith would say it's borrowed capital.
Yes.
All this stuff that talks about, humanitarianism and rights and so on.
This is Jesus talk.
Yeah, this doesn't come from evolutionary biology, for example.
Right. And so it gets all smashed into, our secular world. And so now as Christians, the gospel is actually much more complicated to understand how we're going to live it out. Because there is a very local, you and I only have a certain capacity.
Yeah.
But in a democracy, I'm a ruler of one. I am a king. I have a vote. I rule my vote. I get to say something of power.
Yeah.
I may not mean, some people doesn't think it means much, but as I raise my hand and other people raise it like me, then we make a royal decree about something.
Mm-hmm.
So all of a sudden things are a little bit more convoluted. So I think when it's applying the gospel, there are things like, what do you do about the immigration? But there's also just ways of thinking about it.
Right.
Of helping people think differently and not in a partisan manner.
Yeah, for sure.
Because I think partisan thinking reduces humanity. I think that's what I've thought now, talking to you all this time.
I couldn't be I couldn't be more in agreement. I just had a PhD student from the U of A met me yesterday. He might get a hold of you guys, actually, because he's doing a survey on evangelicals and their the reason they stay committed to the Republican Party. And it's a whole PhD study on it. He has a background in evangelicalism, hasn't utterly shed that himself, but you could tell he's still involved in church, but has changed a lot. And he's trying to figure out, he's looking at his friends and family back in the Bible Belt, right, and going, why is it that they, that they have to stay loyal to this party that doesn't seem to be required of them in their scriptures? Like, why is that? And it's an interesting question, I think. But I would agree with you. I don't think that the partisan party choosing, pick the righteous one, is what we should be doing at all. I think we have a king and a kingdom, Jesus Christ and his kingdom, and we should seek to represent that here on earth, and really shouldn't, that should be the highest flag on the flagpole,
right?
At the least, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I guess no matter what we talk about, I mean, to go all the way back to the beginning, I think we have to talk about it with heavy hearts. Mm-hmm. I think everything that is to be talked about with heavy hearts, because it's human beings who Jesus loved and who Jesus died for and longs to be in relationship with, who are in conflict, and they're mistreating each other, and they're in desperate situations. And no matter where you are in all of it, you're one of those in some form or another. And it's just sad. And we hope that Jesus will come and make things new. And we have to remind people that we're image bearers and deserve death, but we have God's love. Yeah. And that's, I don't know how you stand up in the public square and other than in just declaring. I mean, in some ways, Paul gets in front of power and he says, I don't know, maybe in that meeting, to go back to your meeting, you stand up and you say, according to the scriptures, this is who Jesus is, and this is who will be saved. And this is how it looks, guys. And the king changes all of this, but until we all acknowledge the king, this is the battle and conflict we're going to have.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I'm actually president of this little business association here in town these days, and
what's the name of this business association?
Sunshine Mile.
Sunshine Mile.
So it's the strip of Broadway that's getting redone. There's been a lot of mixed feelings. People haven't liked the way the city's approached things. There've been other organizations in the area that I wish we would have had better relationships with over the years, and we're working on that. And it's an interesting thing to watch and to be a part of. But I will say that I came in as an observer and eventually, had a role. But one of the first things I noticed was we harbor unforgiveness here. It's just one of the first, we in this organization harbor unforgiveness. And it's not a Christian organization. It's not made up of all Christians. There are a lot of people with faith commitments involved, interestingly, I discovered. But just to, kind of a place to start was to start going, so when somebody's wronged us in the past, we don't talk to them anymore. But we don't want people to treat us that way. Kind of like, let's do unto others as we would have them do unto you. And, just starting there, let's just try to be that kind of organization. And I think that's opened doors back up for communication and mutual working together. That's been pretty cool. And we'll see how it all goes. That's the little step, but it's been cool to see, in my mind, something that was kind of breaking because of, just because of unforgiveness, that you see little rays of light. Okay, this feels a little more like and it's not going to be perfect, and it isn't the kingdom of God, for goodness sakes, but it can be influenced by it.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think forgiveness is Maybe
Yeah.
it's a big key to the gospel, right?
Huge key. And then you can like, I think you can have the honest discussion of like, why do I believe so much in forgiveness? I think this is how our souls are saved, for goodness sakes. And so wouldn't that be how we'd move forward with
right.
any endeavor?
Right.
So, that's just my little tiny
Well, I think
experience.
and then how does that apply moving forward in all these bigger things?
Oh, I think those kind of discussions need to be had at all these levels.
Yes.
Right?
Right.
Like over and over. And so that's why I want people who are shaped by the gospel in those kind of where they don't just look and go, I can't stand these people, they don't work with us, but where they kind of feel brokenhearted that there's no forgiveness around here.
Yeah. Oh, I think forgiveness gives up power. For me to forgive you means that I can't hold something over you.
One of the key things we've needed to think about is giving influence to somebody who didn't do well with it before.
Yeah.
Or who hurt us with it before.
Right.
But giving it back to them again.
Yeah.
And isn't that like a little picture of grace? But in order for us to do this reconciling work in a community organization, I mean, if you count everyone's sins against them, well, you just will never work together.
Yeah.
So
it's interesting. So this maybe to answer the immigration thing, and this is maybe a story, and I don't know if it has a practical application, but when you were talking, I remember the story, and it may be totally off the deep end, but it may not apply to any of this. But it made me think while you were talking. So I watched Chopped a lot. I used to. You know what Chopped is?
No.
Okay, so they take 4 chefs from different places in the United States, and they put them in a kitchen, and they give them these random baskets in a 3-course meal. So they'll end up with like, the appetizer, and you've got, gummy bears, English muffins, and chicken. And you have to come up with like an appetizer. Anyway, they tell everybody's story. And, they're going through and telling the people's story as they're cooking and things like that. And so one of the guys is a youth pastor and a chef.
yeah.
And another woman's story in there is that her mother died, or she hasn't seen her mother in a long time, and she was going to use this $10,000 prize to go visit her and do I don't remember all the details of her situation. At the beginning of the show, I hadn't seen it before, I told my wife, he's going to win, and he's going to give her the money. That's how it's going to work. And then that's exactly how it happened. And it was a really powerful moment because you could see he needed the money.
Yeah.
Because he needed the money to open, like to fix up this restaurant he's working, and they really needed it. And so he gave her half of his money so that she could go see her mother. And this beautiful moment, and I thought, so it's not necessarily forgiveness, but he gave up power and right for somebody who had need. He didn't need to. He could have said, I'm sorry, that sounds really hard for you, but this is a contest, and I won, and I need $10,000. And everybody would, you don't need to give her the money.
Right.
But I think that is a picture of, I don't know how you apply that. At some level, when we think about immigration, it is the thing that we are speaking to the people who are like rule of law, that is part of, okay, what's your power? And can you give up some of that power in order for someone who has less? I think that's...
I like it.
I don't know.
We got to call this thing to a close for 2 reasons. 1, it's been a while. 2, I am podcasting again in 3 minutes.
3 minutes?
Yep.
What are you doing? Your
Odd Church podcast starts in 3 minutes.
All right. Have fun with the Odd Church podcast.